Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news for Friday, December 6th. So, yeah, I don't know why my subscribe button's not popping up. I thought maybe it was because I was starting on this screen instead, but it does just seem like it just isn't working at the moment, which I suppose is another thing I should keep an eye out for and see if I need to consider fixing that at some point in the future. So it's been a while now, I would say, as I'm going to warm up here. Wow, Marvel Rivals starting with a very high launch of 444,286 concurrent player in a 24-hour concurrent in 24-hour period, which, yeah, that's what you certainly would have expected from any Marvel property, is that they, at least on launch day, there would be a lot of people playing it. Unfortunately, it really has been the case with like Kill the Justice League and Marvel Snap and just so many other licensed properties. There's been some really major flops based on this. Midnight Suns is another one where even if those games are not flops inherently themselves, the hype around them have been big flops. There wasn't just the massive put it into the number 4 spot, beating Naraka Blade Point and GTA 5 and Call of Duty. Timing almost certainly plays a factor here, that since we are in December and that more kids may just have more free time, less time that they could go outside and play, although let's be honest, kids don't go outside and play that much these days anyways, but just being more indoors in general, I think, may also increase gameplay in the winter months. And yeah, anyways, to get back to what I was saying, is it was really hitting me yesterday where I really did want to start playing some more some Borderlands pre-sequel, which is saying quite a lot considering how awful my experience so far with Borderlands pre-sequel is. I actually watched a video showing Borderlands 1 and just like the more simplistic layout of Borderlands 1, where there's just less skills and there's less guns and just less complications around it, is, I think, really my flavor of those kind of looter games, whether it's a Borderlands first person shooter or whether it's Diablo, which inherently I would like to play something like Diablo 1. It's just a little bit more simplistic, less types of items to attach and less skills to actually wrap your head around. We really went down this evolutionary path on games in general with RPG elements, where it went from here's a small selection of skills where each skill is going to be fairly unique and hopefully useful, versus what we have now, where you have massive selections, massive numbers of character classes, massive number of items and stats on items, and the numbers have just gotten far too big to the point where it's either random. For most people, I think it is random, where people don't even think about the stats or the skills or anything, and they just pick things at random based on whims more than any logical strategy. Or you are going to outside sources like websites for farming guides or skill building guides or things like that if you really care about it. But yeah, unfortunately I can't just get back to playing Borderlands pre-sequel. I could do it, certainly, but then me being in the middle of this major emergency, or in the next stage of a major emergency, who knows where the middle or the end is going to be, there's still just a ton of house cleaning for me to do, and there's still just a lot that needs to be gotten done and focused on more. Yeah. And I am still running into the problem where it's very cold, so wanting to clean house by putting things in the garage is less than ideal. One thing I did do, and this is an interesting situation where most people will never have this as a possibility, is I have two refrigerators. One that is a counter depth, I believe, refrigerator that is shorter. It's not as deep as a regular refrigerator, and it's built into a little alcove. The alcove is just very poorly designed because the alcove really should have been the full depth of a regular size refrigerator. Of course, that would have made the cabinetry around it even deeper than it already is, and it already is, frankly, twice as deep as it really should be. The whole my kitchen in general is just poorly thought out and designed to start with. What they really could have done easily, though, is put the refrigerator outside of the work triangle to some extent and put it where my pantry is, and then had a less deep pantry instead, and that would have been a minimal loss, but it also would have had my refrigerator facing at a 90 degrees away from where the sink is and where the oven is, and so there's just more design. So because of that, I have a cheap secondary refrigerator that is regular size and is just out and about and not in an alcove, so it doesn't have any real restrictions. Well, I never really needed that much space ever, but it certainly allowed me to have a lot of like drinks and things like that chilled. You want to keep your refrigerator full. You don't want it to, or mostly full, not crammed full with every square inch full of stuff, but because you do want airflow, but you do want it mostly full, 90% full, 95% full, something like that for all the cubic feet you can find. And so once I went through all of that and said, you know what, most of this stuff is shelf stable, and if I'm going to drink a drink, I can take one off the shelf and put it in the refrigerator to chill it as I'm drinking the already chilled one that I just took out of the refrigerator. So I can certainly do a replacement thing there. And as I started doing that, as I started cleaning out the refrigerator, I realized I don't need this refrigerator right now. I will in the future. And so since refrigerators have a motor that is just constantly going in its compressor to air condition, they are fairly massive energy draws. Like, your air conditioner, depending on how much you run your air conditioner, is probably your number one energy draw. If you're running electric heaters or electric dryers, electric dryer would be your number one energy draw, I imagine, since that's the thing that would be on the 240. But if you have a as I'm lucky enough to do, if you have a gas air conditioner heater, if you have a gas water heater, if you have well, I have a hookup for a gas laundry dryer, but actually I do have an electric dryer, then your refrigerator would be your biggest draw there, unless you were charging a car, which might at that point be your largest draw. And so I realized that, and I'm like, okay, let me just unplug this refrigerator. And it's a very weird situation to unplug a refrigerator and go, I'm just not going to use this, and I'm just going to save it for later. You have to be careful. I looked up how to do it properly, because you don't want mold and anything to grow in there. You don't want to come back a month later and find that the inside of the refrigerator is just full of mold, and so the moisture is your enemy at that point. So what I looked up, and hopefully this is the right instructions, I guess I'll report back later, is that you basically leave the doors open for at least 12 hours and let all the moisture come out, and then dry it with paper towels or a towel, and just get all the moisture off all the surfaces. And while I was at that, I figured I'd just use some cleaning bleach to clean the whole thing, and so it looks almost brand new now, perfectly clean as a refrigerator too, and it is now completely empty with the doors closed. And I'll have to come back, I imagine, once a week and just look in it and make sure that there's not smell growing. I did put some baking soda in it, so hopefully that would catch any extra moisture. But it is certainly a weird situation that most people will not be in, where you can just make that call. And it's a call I might be wrong about. I am glad to see something new here, and I am certainly glad to see Banana dropping down the charts, because we just don't need these kinds of clicker games that are just being run by bots more than anything. Although arguably you might make the exact same argument that there's probably at least 300,000 bots playing Counter-Strike 2 also. But yeah. Now, you do get into a weird situation now that you have a refrigerator that's empty, and that there's a massive amount of cubic feet being not used, and it isn't completely uncommon for people to take broken old refrigerators and think of them as shelves, which usually turns into a nightmare scenario of mold growing in it and or insects getting into it. I remember when I was a kid, for some reason, my family put a old freezer or refrigerator just on the back porch, unplugged, and I stored a bunch of Nintendo stuff in it, and then when I came back like a year later, it was very much moldy and mildewy and stunk. So they, I assume, did not get all the moisture out of it, although that may just be the case of how things go. There may be a real limit on how long you can have a refrigerator unplugged. Noticeably, it is worth pointing out that once a store model of a refrigerator is put in like a hardware store, it's plugged in usually. It's set to some kind of demo mode where the light will come on, at least, if it's not actually cooling. And there might very well be a reason for that. But yeah, that was a weird decision, and it would be certainly interesting if that reduced my electrical bill significantly. But yeah, it's not something most people can do. Immediately, it does require me to completely also change how much groceries I'm going to buy in the future. And when you're typically not buying in bulk, you're typically overpaying even more for food. And this really is only a situation that happens that I was able to do because I wasn't even using one refrigerator to its fullest. I had a whole chiller drawer in the smaller refrigerator that just had emergency water being chilled in it. It just wasn't being used for anything else. So, but yeah, it will be tough. I certainly can't buy more than 3 weeks worth of food. The freezer is much smaller, and the refrigerator part is much smaller. but that also gives me an opportunity to try Amazon Fresh and see how their delivery service and all of that goes with a small order, which right now there is a sale where you can save up to $10 off if you buy, I think, like $25 worth of food of specific brands of food from Amazon.com. Yep. And I was out and about yesterday and I decided to go into the local library and actually get a library card. And yeah, libraries seemed a lot bigger last time I was in them. Of course, last time I was in a library, I was a lot shorter in the sense that I was probably a child. Now, notice how Marvel Rivals here is in the 4th spot. When we go to my chart, Marvel Rivals will almost certainly not even be on the chart yet. It's going to have to be in a high spot for weeks and weeks and weeks to balance out. How many weeks? Well, it'd be 32 weeks. It would have to be in the top chart before it would even start to balance out and show up. At least 32 weeks, I'd say. So yeah, my long-term chart unfortunately does seem like it is just too long-term to be of any real value. There is perhaps an argument to adopt the chart to only show the last month, which that would be the next step. You could say a rolling, not actual month, but you could certainly do a rolling 30 days. You could do a rolling 90 days instead of 365 days. And so yeah, that is something I should probably think about doing once I get back to doing things, is change my chart down to a rolling 90 days, which is going to be roughly 3 months. I could even do rolling 100 days for a round number, and then the chart would change more, and then at the end of the year change it back to show the last 360 days. By doing it that way, there would be more to talk about. And honestly, changing it back and swapping it is not the right thing to do. The right thing to do would be to just duplicate this chart as it is, which is a rolling year. And, well, not a rolling year, it is a actual year, January 1st to present. Duplicate the chart as it is and then make a new chart that is shorter, or more accurately adjust the current chart so the link stays the same to be shorter. But yeah, this chart seems like it maybe has changed a little bit. I don't recall if Don't Starve Together has been on the chart before, so that does kind of make it feel like something has changed right here. But the top ones, such as Banana, still staying very solid. It is, while we're talking about charts, and while we will be talking about Game of the Year awards, I think fairly quickly in the next few weeks, it is noticeable that I've seen 2 reviews on the Indiana Jones game in the Great Circle. One is from DF Retro, which really is just talking about performance and certainly highlights why DF Retro stands alone as its own unique style of reviewing games, in that they're only really talking about performance and visuals. They're not talking much about the story or any gameplay mechanics to mention. I saw a more traditional review, both very positive. DF Retro pointing out some stuttering weirdness. the fact that Indiana Jones requires ray tracing hardware. You can't do it with software, even if you're not using ray tracing in their minimal requirements. It's a first, according to DF Retro. But yeah, it is also rendering all of its cutscenes in engine, which future-proofs certainly higher resolutions and higher frame rates in the future if it can be done right, but I think this is very much a new technology that is not being done right. I should probably also mention still that I may get a phone call at any point, although there's a decent chance I won't today. I will say, in the reflection of hearing a very good reception of the Indiana Jones games and seeing the review of the Indiana Jones game that I've seen, Microsoft and whoever their publishing partners really were there did a very poor job on promoting and publishing what this Indiana Jones game was going to be. The stealth gameplay mechanic is a thing, but it is not emphasized in the reviews I've seen, and I don't think it really is as much of a thing as you might think, because it is a game that's a lot more like Hitman than just a stealth, Metal Gear Solid, Splinter Cell type game, I think. Not in that you can find different weapons or a whole bunch of different outfits, but there are outfits that play a big role, which I guess is in line with the Indiana Jones movies. And it's much more of an open world game than I would have thought. But the biggest complaint I definitely would have is that there's just a real emphasis in showing him turning things and manipulating things like that was going to be a significant chunk of what he was doing, and it just really isn't, as far as I can tell from the reviews. There is some Tomb Raider-esque platforming, but it's like super simple. And then the cutscenes in engine are doing like shot-for-shot remakes of what was in the movies, so there's really good nostalgia plays. So yeah, it seems to me like they did a very poor job of advertising what the game was going to be, for what it is. There's a lot more punching in the game than shooting. Whereas I wouldn't have been super surprised if it did turn it into a shooter. So yeah, Microsoft acquiring all these companies is certainly not doing it any favors as far in the publishing department at this point. And Microsoft needs to be really much better at publishing games, scheduling games, and promoting games. And for all of its success, the Indiana Jones game now is in this horrible position where it is too late to be considered for any of the Game of the Year awards. Like, the nominees have already come out. It's probably a decent point in which the game could get great sales, but it is going to totally be forgotten unless there's just absolutely nothing that comes out in 2025, which is a possibility, certainly. It's totally going to be forgotten by the end of next year. And that's why I think in particular the Game of the Year awards for video games should come out in January or February, where it's much slower and it gives every single judge way more time to actually play the games to completion and review them. But yeah, I doubt that would ever actually happen. I guess personally, if I ever was going to do a Game of the Year Awards, I'd probably do it in January or February. Of course, you probably don't get as much viewership, too, if you put it in January or February. Thing remastered. So the sale is over, noticeably, on Steam. And they have brought back this chart, which is still kind of a mess. At my zoom in level, at my ratio, like everything else looks perfectly fine as far as the width and the zoom in, but here you click on something like this and then you have to scroll back up without hovering over anything else where it would swap. And even if you click on something like this, then you have to come over and scroll back down, and it's just a very complicated experience, to say the least, to see this information where every other bit of information on the front page is depicted way better. We are back to blue, although I wouldn't be surprised if this is slightly darker shade of blue than it was, but I don't think it actually does change after sales. And that's the weird thing, is every sale there's this experiment to change what the front page looks like, but then they just go back to the same default layout afterwards. So maybe it takes them just a long time to debate and get the statistics. The only thing that's changed recently, and by recently I mean in my entire memory for the past few years, would be these community recommendations here. And you can see how this community recommendation design takes up a lot more space and tries to focus on individual games, whereas this, which is the worst part of the front page, is just crammed with way too much games. It's too many choices. Yeah, it would be interesting to see if one of those specialists who designs menus, like John Taffer from Bart Rescue has specialists like that, where what they would say as far as the front page goes, because there's just a lot here. And I know there's a lot of games they have to promote, but it definitely doesn't draw your eye particularly well when you have 4 different options. I would say definitely probably should be 3 options on the front page. Always. Not anymore. And yeah. There's definitely an inconsistency there too. You can see Indiana Jones in the Great Circle is rated 92% positive. Yeah. So let's see if I can just generally see from the reviews I've seen whether these screenshots are good representations of what the game is. There are a lot of cutscenes in game. There's a lot of points where you kind of are just watching a game instead of playing a game, which for Indiana Jones may be alright. This may also be the case since I did hear Steven Spielberg and maybe Harrison Ford were actually somewhat involved in that, although those kinds of rumors are always floated, even if it's not really true. But yeah, I could see how Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford in particular would say, hey, let's make this be the path in which new Indiana Jones content is made, instead of trying to do yet another live action movie. They say Troy Baker sounds pretty good, like younger Harrison Ford, where old Harrison Ford, I've heard it complained he doesn't sound like Indiana Jones anymore, and certainly he doesn't look like Indiana Jones. But yeah, the whipping to fight people, I think maybe happens a little bit less than you would think. The sneaking around. There's a whole bunch of side quests, and there is skills that you will unlock by finding books and pamphlets. So it kind of has like a Fallout style to it, where you will do a side quest. At the end of the side quest, you might very well find a book that will give you a new skill, new skills, making it more of a thing. Definitely there's an emphasis in a couple of these screenshots of more action, but they're not overemphasizing it, I would bet. Yep. There are 3 main locations, one of which being Vatican City, and you're not always fighting Nazis, you're also fighting some Italians too. This is an interesting success so far, unless there's just, and I don't imagine the success will go away, in that it has just been probably close to 30 years since there has been any other Indiana Jones game of major note that was actually trying to do anything. The most recent previous to this would be Lego Indiana Jones re-releases. But yeah, one of the major complaints that I did hear on overall very high praise of Indiana Jones, though, is that some of the action sequences are more just cutscenes, where if you compare them to the action sequences of even Uncharted 1, Uncharted 1 has more interactivity, and some of the puzzles have already been done better in Tomb Raider games. And so they are suffering here from not one-upping games that were inspired by Indiana Jones, and by the fact that there just hasn't been any competition or development of Indiana Jones games to compete against Tomb Raider and Uncharted games that were effectively just heavily inspired by Indiana Jones. It is kind of a shame, though, that there aren't more adventure games that you could say were inspired by Indiana Jones, and there aren't several more franchises that popped up. But I guess there is probably a low saturation level of just how many adventure games people really want to play. I also think it's worth pointing out that I have a slight concern around machine games, in that this just took me to Bethesda's publisher page when I clicked on Machine Games. Machine Games was making the Wolfenstein reboot series, and them instead making an Indiana Jones game makes me question if we will ever get the third Wolfenstein game, or if the poor reception of Wolfenstein Youngblood and Cyberpilot has just run that series into the ground. It really undercuts things like Wolfenstein 2: The New Colossus, which apparently I own and haven't covered. If that never gets made, if a Wolfenstein 3 never gets made, it's just gonna really hurt the desire to ever go back and play it or talk about it. And certainly it hurts Bethesda as a publisher somewhat to have so many of the different games listed on their page here, when I would really wanted to specifically see what was developed by Machine Games. And that once again reminds me that we really do need some kind of IMDb like website where you can actually sort games by their developer. Although in fairness, I could just go to Wikipedia and just Google search Machine Games, and that probably would give me a list of games they actually developed. So that information is out there. It's just not conveniently being placed on Steam. And I think Steam and Valve made a mistake there, certainly allowing publishers to hijack developers, even though in this case Bethesda Software wholly owns Machine Games and Microsoft now wholly owns Bethesda. It still just was a mistake to allow publishers to hijack where the link to the developer goes, instead of them specifically saying we're going to either pull up a search result for every game that has this developer listed, or we're going to automatically make a developer page for each of the developers. Right. Now we can see Marvel Rivals is only at 74% positive, so I could see how people may be fairly hyped about it and trying it right now, but they may find that they don't really love it. I'd assume that this is an Overwatch style game with Marvel characters, which I imagine would get it a level of success in that it is free to play, so you can see why the numbers would be so high, and that definitely highlights how there's just not really a way to compare paid content versus free to play content. In the long run, though, I just don't feel like games like Overwatch proved that there would be a significantly high number of players to make a player base for these kinds of games, unless it becomes a major esport and esports continue to be a thing, which right now esports feel like they're being less of a thing, and they certainly aren't growing outside of their current audience and their current market like people speculated they would. People were building esports arenas, and entire cities were funding esports teams. And I think just the momentum in that direction alone started to hurt the enthusiasm for esports, as it started to feel perhaps too corporate. Interesting. X now being used instead of Twitter as far as different websites being listed here. And taking note here that they're picking Discord to be number 1, but Twitter to be number 2, YouTube to be number 3, then Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, Twitch, and then you've got, let's see, Douyin, which I don't even know what that is, Baidu Taiba, I haven't heard of, Bilibili, which I have heard of, and Weibo. All of these clearly are Asian sites of different sorts. And if you were to look at the icons, Douyin seems to be something like TikTok. That would be my guess. So yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if there is a heavy amount of Asian fans also playing this. And there is certainly something to be said about having Marvel characters be a thing in the Asian countries versus trying to have, say, well, Marvel things in Asian countries might be slightly more popular than other brands and genres, although I wouldn't say Marvel things are super popular. They're more popular than random characters. Captain America is in there, but not particularly heavily emphasized. This is from NetEase Games. And PC support here is probably fairly helpful too. One thing I am seeing though is it does kind of feel like you're doing a lot less gun shooting in this game, where there's a lot of characters where it just really wouldn't make as much sense for a character to have a gun. And so by having those different kinds of attacks, perhaps you're going to make the game more interesting. It will be interesting certainly to see, can Marvel Rivals actually rival something like Deadlock when Deadlock actually comes out? Or will the influence of Valve just be so high that Deadlock succeeds, where Marvel Rivals, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a big initial burst and then it dies down fairly quickly. Anyways, let's go through the Video Games Chronicle news stories. Tencent reportedly wants a greater say over Ubisoft as the investment discussions continue. At a certain point, I'm not 100% convinced that Yves Guillemot, the CEO, and the other potential private partner in this move to take Ubisoft private, I'm not sure he really cares too much about control as much as he may just care about saving his own butt. And those two things are usually fairly connected, but I wouldn't be surprised if Yves Guillemot actually agreed to just like a golden parachute style deal in taking the company private, and did allow Tencent to have a lot more influence. On the other hand, I could be completely wrong about that, and it could be 100% the opposite of that. It may be that Yves Guillemot sees this as a family business and really does want control and really does think that he knows what is best. Although, I would like to see a small period in his history in which he has proven that he actually does know the best, because there has just been a long-running history of Ubisoft doing fairly poorly as a company, some of which has been generously excused based off of Viacom trying to do a hostile takeover over Ubisoft. But yeah, even after that threat went away, Ubisoft has not drastically changed for the better. And yeah, Tencent wanting more control. It's probably not the best for Ubisoft, but it may happen. We are in this weird situation right now where there's just kind of nothing from Ubisoft to even care about. It is pointless hopes for Beyond Good and Evil 2. Pointless hopes for Sands of Time reboots. Pointless hopes for a new Prince of Persia series that actually gets support. Pointless hope for Assassin's Creed games that actually are good and lead towards that series actually being playable once again, or desirable to play. Yeah, I don't think there's a single game from Ubisoft that I have any faith in at this point. Steam demo for Sona Kuni, which was Video Game Chronicles Bit Summit Game of the Show, is available now. It's a Hotline Miami inspired 2D action game developed by a Japanese hip-hop crew. Interesting. Sono Kunai is probably the more accurate way to describe that. So at first glance, it just looks like yet another Survivors game. Perhaps there's some really good metal sound effect, hip-hop sound effects playing there. Not metal, hip-hop, I guess. But yeah. And that might change a lot, certainly, if there's just visuals that align with a hip-hop sound. I was watching this old, I guess it's a horror anthology series. It's more of a black comedy series is what it says, but a lot of times it doesn't even feel like it's comedy as much as it is just not particularly scary stories with some scary twists. It's called Spine Chillers. And there's this interesting concept thrown out there, and that one episode, since each episode stands alone, is this death metal band that decides instead to invent a new sound called life metal that is about singing about happiness and life and positivity, versus death metal, which it would be singing about death. I'm like, oh, well, that's an interesting concept, certainly. Could you take the sharp, I would think industrial would be the word to use, sound of metal, and sing about life, and at a certain point I would have to assume that it is just going to be very similar to something like a Christian metal, which I imagine there is a Christian metal out there, although Christian metal could certainly be singing about death of Jesus in particular quite a bit anyway, so it wouldn't inherently be life metal at that point. So yeah, it was an interesting thing, but once they started actually playing the songs that they had very quickly written up, I imagine, for the show, they didn't sound industrial or metal to my ear. I'm not a great point there, but this one says it's spam from a telemarketer, so I'm gonna ignore that. See if I turn it upside down. Nope, I don't have that feature enabled on the phone where you can turn it upside down to silence your phone. That some phones will do that if enabled. Yep, there we go. Once they actually did start singing it, it sounded a lot like the Beatles, just, you know, acoustic pop, things like that. There's definitely not anything metallic from it that you would expect. So, I guess that's the challenge out there, is could you actually make something that was metal and still sing about positivity? And that there are metal and heavy metal songs, certainly, that aren't about death. There is also certainly a line as far as my personal attention. Like, I don't listen to any music at all, so I have no ear for it, totally tone deaf. But I would say that I prefer, if I'm hearing the song in the show from metal, to hear and understand what the singer is saying and actually hear lyrics. So screeching, growling, just throat tearing screaming into the microphone that you often see in death metal and other kinds of metal does not sound particularly good. I can see it as, here's effectively a note that I'm doing with my voice. So if it's a part of the song overall, and the lyrics are understandable for 99% of the time, and then there's every now and then to really emphasize a screaming, growling point, that's alright. But even in that, I actually want to understand what they're screaming and growling, or at least understand that they're not actually saying any words and they're just growling and screaming. But I definitely don't want to listen to songs that I can't understand the lyrics. And I definitely also believe that my tone deafness leads me to experience music in general, and I know this has nothing to do with video games, although music and video games is a completely different thing. But the fact that I do listen to lyrics and try to think about what's being said, and then I realize that almost every song has nonsense lyrics, or it's lyrics that are way darker than the tone and the general assumption of people is, that definitely puts me in a different position from most people, where I'm fairly certain that most people just listen to the beats and the tones and they don't care about the lyrics at all. Sorry, I lost my stride there. Moving on with video game news, the Dragon Quest creator asked players who finished Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake to lend it to children, teach them how to play UG Hori requests. I mean, perfectly amenable request, really. And it's an interesting long-term investment that we just don't see pushed or promoted in the video game industry. In particular, because the video game industry wants to force every single person to buy a fresh new copy of every single game. So, yeah. But I imagine this also just highlights that the Dragon Quest series, particularly Dragon Quest III, is such an older style of JRPG that they probably have metrics that show them that these kinds of games are not being played as often as they once were. While I was in the library getting a library card, I noticed that they did have a very small cart of Xbox, PlayStation, and Switch games. I'm not 100% sure that they were even Xbox current games. Backward compatibility, they could be Xbox 360 games and PlayStation 4 games and 5 games. I think I saw another shelf with perhaps even older games for like PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2. Small selection though, and inherently when I gave away my Xbox 360, had I known or searched, had I done the research at the library, I could have easily given them way more games, and I assume most games are always rented out anyways, if they want to go in that direction. Yeah. But yeah, I certainly could have filled up their coffers quite easily there. And it might have actually benefited more people than who I did give it to, where I'm not sure that the young kids that I gave my mostly mature games did anything with them. I wouldn't be surprised if they are now, years later, still sitting in a box in a garage somewhere. But yeah, decisions were made and can't rehash it, but I would point out, if you have old video games you want to get rid of, just Switch games and things like that, giving them to a library is going to feel really good. But if you're financially struggling, selling them back to GameStop or trading them is going to help you a lot better than just donating them. Once physical games go away completely, whenever that happens, there will be that whole avenue. Yeah, and that's one thing certainly that I was reminded of also being in the library is that this library is almost certainly full of people, mostly being full of people that are financially struggling in some way, kids in particular. The rich kids aren't going to go to a library and rent out a game or rent out a book. It's going to be middle class and poorer kids and adults. And the library definitely has changed in its value, in that libraries used to aspire to have one copy of every single book that they could get their hand on, whereas libraries nowadays really are only keeping books on the shelves that people are renting out, and they're selling off and just getting rid of a lot of books otherwise. And so a lot of the used books you might see on Amazon.com very possibly are being sold off by the libraries themselves, just because nobody's checking them out. And so if there was like a post-apocalyptic situation and you went to a library, there would be a lot of books, but not all of it, not all the information that mankind has to offer. Remember, libraries are not allowed to digitally lend video games at the moment, but they are allowed to digitally lend movies and ebooks, and so there's a lot more digitalness and onlineness, and that's the reason I got the library card in the first place. It's just so I could use a service to potentially digitally rent out movies and just have a larger selection, just in case I ever want to rent out movies and watch them, versus using Amazon Prime or Hulu or any of those paid services, which Amazon Prime Video in particular is getting really terrible with its ads. I think I'm pausing the video now and seeing ads even. But yeah, I probably will never ever actually use that service. And another thing about the library that shocked me is that they said I could rent out 5 things that day, and then in the future I could rent out up to 99 things. And I'm like, what in the world? Who in their right mind is going to rent out 99 items from a library? That would be a massive amount. And it's just a case where they don't care. They don't even have late fees at this library. It's like, we don't do late fees, and we just have automatic renewals, and we have standing orders if somebody else wants to check it out. But it's like the library is inherently trying to have a significant portion of its collection in the hands of the community, because they don't have enough square footage and shelf space in the actual library to have it be available. But yeah, it's just like crazy to not have late fees at all. Although I don't know how much late fees ever funded a library. The library itself is probably funded by grants and taxes perfectly fine. But yeah. Of course, they also have email and easier ways to contact people. And I imagine there's just less book hoarders as there once was, where in the past there definitely were stories of book hoarders that would just have stacks and stacks of books in their houses and never return books. But yeah, let's move on. I am moving slow on this Friday, certainly, and kind of rambling. Let's Build a Dungeon gets a demo on Steam. I'm not sure if it really is that much news that games are getting demos. The Thing Remastered is now available. Night Dive announced the remaster didn't have a release date, but has been surprise dropped on PC and consoles. Interesting. So, to me, that seems to make it seem like they really screwed up a promotion aspect there. Yeah, I just don't know why you would do that, other than you don't have a lot of faith in this remaster of the game. If Night Dive was the publisher, but there was actually another developer, and then Night Dive as the publisher was trying to screw over that developer and just not have it sell, or trying to save every possible penny, I could see why you would do a surprise release. But now certainly it's not the time to do surprise releases. You do surprise releases when no other games are out, and you would do it before you'd already announced the game. Yeah. There might possibly have been yet another Thing movie that was in development, and that they thought they were going to put it out in line with a new Thing movie, but I haven't heard anything saying that a new Thing movie was in development and then got secretly canceled. That definitely just seems weird. PUBG creator gives an update on Prologue and Artemis, launches free tech demo preface. Brenda Green last gave information on the Prologue 3 years ago. And is that the entire name of the demo there? Or was there supposed to be a period here? Maybe the demo is called Preface, and then, yeah, this is a different sentence. Brenda Green last gave information on Prologue 3 years ago. Yeah, so seems like they haven't fully abandoned the game yet. EA has made 23 more of its accessibility patents for free for any studio to use. Now offers 38 patents in total for all developers to use at no cost. Although inherently, I don't know if that means that EA is releasing these patents into public domain. I'm not sure that there even is a way to release patents. Yeah. There might very well be a danger in the terrible patent system as it is now, in that if you were to give up patents and not maintain them, that somebody else, a patent troll, could just file similar patents, which I think probably is happening at a massive automated scale, to make claims. It may very well be also that these patents are super generic and shouldn't be patents in the first place. That's usually the case. So intelligent personalized speech recognition sounds like something that should not exist, since many devices do that. Generative expressive speech audio from text data, meaning audio that is more personalized and human sounding instead of just cold. I'm saying a word, but I have no inflection on whether the word is supposed to be said warmly or coolly or with aggression or fear or anything like that. Generating speech in the voice of a player of a video game. Interesting, but I don't know who would even want that. Like, if I was playing some game where I had to talk into a microphone, which I'd probably not want to do that in the first place because it's probably a nightmare to actually do it. The last thing I'd want to hear in my headphones is my own voice saying something different to me. That could lead to a real psychotic break on people. voice aging machine learning using machine learning. So seem like these are fairly new patents too. Motion-based music style, change using deep learning, and dynamically selecting speech functionality on client devices. So you could potentially change the way the voice sounds. I can't help but wonder, though, if this isn't a poison well, in the sense that EA at some point in the future may sue somebody using these patents, even though they're putting them out for use now, or even looking at these patents then removes a clean hands, I never saw it argument from developers that would want to potentially develop their own system or do something similar. Inherently, the fact that you can get a patent for something that does not significantly change systems and processes that already exist, such as speech recognition, and the fact that you can get a patent without submitting a working example in the digital field in particular is crazy. It is definitely super crazy. And in general, I think computer programming code patents just shouldn't exist, because it's all just variations on programming language, and it's just not that unique. Patents should be perhaps for smaller industries where protecting small companies actually would be beneficial, whereas EA is the biggest video game company out there, second maybe to Microsoft, and it's definitely not helping the industry for EA to be allowed to have patents in the first place. There is definitely, I think, an argument to be made that major players in industries should be penalized by not being allowed to have patents, where new startups should be allowed to have patents if you're going to do anything. More direct control. Honestly, it would make a lot more sense if there was just straight up advisory boards for different industries that were constantly just trying to create equity in the industries and not have monopolies. Way better than what the current FTC is doing. Direct manipulation, direct control stuff. Amazon Prime Gaming is offering a further 10 quote free games to mark the Secret Level series, which I wouldn't be surprised if I am going to end up watching Secret Level when it comes out. I'm still watching an anime on Hulu called Dark Gatherings, which is interesting in that it is a horror anime series that has the protagonist be these cute, colorful anime characters, and then all the ghosts and horror elements are drawn in a much more horrific style. So you get this really weird, sharp contrast there, but it kind of works, and it's kind of a road trip anime series is what it evolved into, and that they're going to different haunted places and probably talking about actual haunted locations that are talked about and made up in Japan. And they have this little motto where one character they'll get into their car, and it's weird they even have a car, and one character will throw their hand up and their fist up and go, "Let's go," and then the driver lady will go, "Let's ghost," over that. Very silly. Yeah. I'm not sure what else is worth mentioning, though, as far as me watching stuff. I'm still watching way too much. there is an argument that with these streams, I should probably think about changing the time I stream. But no, I think I'll keep it the same, but I want to get done around midday. That way it's warmer for me to go out and work in the garage more. Clean out the garage. Yeah. Which, yeah, I'm only gonna get so far in actually cleaning out the garage. The Evercade manufacturer has announced a partnership with SNK. Blaze will be releasing officially licensed Neo Geo products in 2025 and 2026. Which, okay. The thing here, I'd have to remind myself though, is what does Evercade make? Evercade line of products consists of handheld consoles and arcade cabinets which specialize in playing retro games. Let's see. I don't want to watch somebody else's YouTube video, so I'm not gonna do that, but it would be very helpful to have some pictures of what Evercades look like. I suspect Evercades are fairly expensive hardware remakes. Maybe they have FPGAs in them, but Evercade as a name is very recognizable. But I would say it's recognizable amongst the more snobbish of retro players, people that are probably spending too much money and effort to emulate old games versus or have hardware that plays the old cartridges, versus just where I think the vast majority of people are fine with emulation even if it's not 100% accurate. And yeah, it's real hard in my mind to justify doing emulation on anything other than a Steam Deck, which will be way overpowered for most emulation and will fix any problems that a Raspberry Pi might have had. Inherently though, you could also do Raspberry Pis fairly well these days to do old first, second, third, fourth generation consoles just fine. Yep. And that is another thing that occurred to me while I was in the library. Is, yeah, I could certainly set up a RetroPie and put it in a corner in the library, but the laws around that would be not in my favor to do that. And I imagine libraries are a harsh target for those things. Librarians probably wouldn't care. They'd love it. Anything that gets more kids in the library is a smart move for them. They're also doing the whole whispering thing, and I think perhaps that alone is something that probably has reasons to still exist, but in modern times it strikes me as odd to be whispering in a library. But I am also fairly loud and bombastic as a person. Foam Stars next season is going to be its last, Square Enix has announced. We hope you will continue to enjoy Foam Stars for many years to come, the producer says. Well, you probably aren't going to enjoy it that much if next season is the last season that they add any new content to, which is I assume what they're saying here. I had completely forgotten about Foam Stars, clearly as something that felt like a Splatoon clone. It didn't catch people's attention. Doesn't seem to me like they added more than a couple of characters to it, and yeah, definitely doesn't seem like they were really supporting it. The art style definitely did catch my attention with this high fashion art style. then like this outfit looks kind of ridiculous too. There wasn't really a lot of reason to have much faith though as far as Square Enix goes, and there's just Square Enix is clearly not interested in supporting games in the long term. Foam parties and like that rave mentality and that more mature let's do drugs and make out feel, which is definitely what I felt like they were targeting here, is not really competing with Splatoon. So yeah, you're trying to create an audience that really wouldn't be there, because Splatoon itself is inherently competing with things like Overwatch, which isn't even really succeeding that well, or Fortnite, which is succeeding very well. And this in particular does not feel different enough from Fortnite that it would go to a different audience or different age group. And Fortnite has expanded certainly to target young kids and older kids in the different Lego versions of Fortnite and the regular version of Fortnite. Yeah, sometimes when I see some of these games fail, which is all I can say this really is, I do think there is perhaps a possibility to bring back characters and try them in different things. Mario Tennis, for instance, probably not a great tennis game, probably didn't sell that well, but bring Mario to other games in that case. Kid Icarus is probably a better example of that, where Kid Icarus as a series has not been successful in a very long time, but it also doesn't make any sense to have just totally ignored Kid Icarus for decades like Nintendo did. So yeah, if Square Enix took these character models and threw them into a whole bunch of other games, at least they could reuse the art. Maybe that's the way it should start anyways, is that characters should be more mascot type characters, then eventually get their own game. Donkey Kong even is an interesting example of that, in that the original Donkey Kong with Jumpman, who eventually became Mario, like Donkey Kong didn't lead immediately to major successes after that. There is Donkey Kong, the arcade game, Donkey Kong Jr., and Donkey Kong 2, I think, and Donkey Kong 3 in the arcades. But yeah, those are fairly forgettable successes, or not even really successes in the case of Donkey Kong 3, I don't think. And then it's kind of a long time before you start to see Donkey Kong show back up in Donkey Kong Country, which that was rare, not even Nintendo, but Donkey Kong was around certainly still as a background character. Toad, I mean, Toads would have been in Super Mario Bros. 3, but they've just slowly evolved to the point where eventually you do have Captain Toad games, entire games around playing with Toads and around Toads. And so it very much probably is a case where there's a long potential for characters. That being said, they didn't really introduce any of these characters, so I can't tell you who any of them are. And that's a problem, too. Let's see. The Game Awards apparently happened, and I saw a bunch of YouTube videos and skipped them all, because they were very short videos, and I just didn't want to go through a long list of videos. But apparently here are the Game Awards winners, if it was chosen by Metacritic. Which I guess means the Game Awards hasn't happened. Well, I saw a bunch of trailers for something. Maybe it was PC Game Awards or something. PC Gaming. I don't know. But yeah. I paid so little attention to the trailers, I thought they were... It was the case that the Game Awards has happened. Wouldn't be surprised if the Game Awards does happen in the next day or two. So, just based on Metacritic, it would be interesting to come back and check this article. And inherently, you're kind of doing the same thing anyways, in that the people who are counted, the game reviewers on Metacritic, are not drastically different from the judges at the Game Awards. So this is very likely going to be very similar to the final outcome. And that certainly is a thought as far as why not have award shows that are just based off of websites like Metacritic. But then how do you hide the surprise at that point? I mean, at a certain point it just wouldn't be a surprise at all. You just say, look, you can go to Metacritic right now and run the numbers and you will know who won. Then there is also a question about whether Metacritic's reviews and numbers are the best metric to use. Yeah. Inherently, I don't think an award show is the right way to do a celebration of games that came out that year anyways. Instead of giving out a first place and then usually not even giving out second places or third places, I think a show that just gave out a ton of awards, if there was just a games we loved in 2024 event, and you were just saying, we love this game, we wanted to highlight this game, so we gave it an award. We're not even bothering to give it a category. I think that would be way better for video games overall. Just not trying to have arguments or comparisons at all. Just say, we're going to have a 8-bit Red Heart award, and we're going to give out that award. It's going to be small, it's going to be cheap, we're going to give a bunch of them out, and we're going to have a Games We Love event. Yeah. If I had time or funding or ability in any way, I would make an event like that right now. Just not even try to have categories. Just say you can vote, have the public vote on every single game that they loved, and then have some kind of threshold where it's maybe an arbitrary number. Maybe you say we're giving out 100 awards as our first place Games We Love games. And so the top 100 games that get voted on by the public all get awards. Giving out 100 awards, and an award show sounds ridiculous and sounds like it would take forever, but in reality you could bring up entire groups of people that are the publishers for several games throughout the year, and give 5 awards at that point. Plus you'd also have at least 60 or 70% of people receiving the award not even show up. So yeah, 30 presentations out of 100 would be very reasonable. Or maybe you just don't bring them up on stage and give them an award anyways. Maybe you start the event going, every single person in this audience has won an award, and then we're going to have several presentations of the games in quicker discussion or music events and things like that. I don't know why I'm bothering to think about that though. It's not going to happen. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 release date has been brought forward by 1 week to now February 4th. Man, I almost said February 11th there. Predator Hunting Ground studio Ilphonic confirms layoffs. The indie developer Ilphonic has made staff cuts across its studios. Yeah, inherently I do have this problem in that I have not played enough new games in a very long time, over a decade, and so this like Predator Hunting Grounds sounds interesting to me, but I also wouldn't be surprised if Predator Hunting Grounds came out in 10 years ago. And I knew I was always going to play older games, but it really was expected that I would eventually catch up and start playing newer games too, and just playing more games in general. I really haven't done that. The Pokemon Center pop-up store is going to return to London in February of 2025. Since we're talking about Pokemon, it is also worth mentioning that a new promo event is happening now for the Pokemon Pocket quick mobile game, and they have made a slight update to the interface, I think, by now having notifications of news show up and catch people's attention more, whereas I think the notifications may have been showing up, but it was hidden behind a button and you just weren't even getting a notification red dot on that button. Either that, or there just hasn't actually been a new update to it. It's still very much the case though that you're severely time limited in Pokemon Pocket, and I am playing a lot of extra Pokemon games for very little reward at the moment, because there's just nothing else that can be done. Also, Memento Mori, which I'm still playing, is continuing to make slight changes and updates that I'm not even bothering to mention. Let's see, the Xbox Year in Review 2024 is now available. I would assume this is from Microsoft Direct, not something just from Video Games Chronicle. Noticeably, though, it is kind of interesting to show a character here, unless this is Starfield, that I don't recognize that. A character here, which I assume is Diablo 4. A character here, which I would assume is Fallout 76. Characters here, which I have no idea what this even is. And then Call of Duty 2. And then another character that I have no idea who that is. So, I recognize 3 out of 6 of these images. And easily I could see being uncertain that this is Diablo 4. I could see this not actually being Call of Duty 2. And I could see this being Fallout 4 and not Fallout 76. So yeah, not particularly a great selection in my opinion as far as what Microsoft has done or Xbox has done overall, although that has been the case for 2024 in general. It's that things are not, games were not really released this year. Yep, and we had already talked about them wanting an edgier Mario, but Nintendo saying no, so that's older stories. That's going to bring us to Gematsu articles. Zenless Zone Zero version 1.4 update launches December 18th. Claydune X3 details its editing tools, network features, and more classes. Apparently this is a RPG maker-like software. I've not heard of Claydune though. Really, I don't know if, well, I do know that we really don't need yet another program that can really only make low effort RPG Maker asset flip type games. And if it is to be believed that even the Japanese kids are not really playing these styles of games and these visuals of games, it really makes very little sense that these kind of game maker tools still get made. The Great Villainous Strategy of Lily launches in spring 2025. I don't know if this is based off of a specific anime or if this is its own unique thing. There's definitely been animes that seem similar to that title, but that exact title does not stir anything in my mind. Apparently it was some kind of crowd-funded, crowd-controlling, Troon-based strategy game. What is Troon? It's probably turn-based. That's what I suspect is supposed to be there. Strategy game. Interesting. Let's see. Jufu Tai Raiden's Guide for Pixel Museum has been announced for Switch and PC. This is some kind of art puzzle Picross game. There obviously is at least a big enough audience, or a perception that there's a big enough audience to continue to make these games every now and then. Although I don't see too many people really playing them. Although the type of people that would be playing them are probably not going to live stream or review playing them either. It's like crosswords, things like that, word jumbles. Those kinds of books still sell fairly well. When you look at the incredibly small selection of books available for purchase at like a Walmart, you will see still 2 or 3 crosswords, word jumble type books. So I do suspect there are some fairly, I imagine, old people that enjoy those kinds of books and those kinds of mental puzzles. With that's their form of gaming, even though it's not video games. Yeah. And at a certain point, it is worth, I guess, pointing out that eventually we will just nostalgically wrap gaming in as its own thing, and previous generations who would have never had access to a video game will still be considered gamers because they were doing the daily crossword puzzles in the newspaper, or they were playing solitaire with actual cards or poker or things like that. And gaming will just, as a term, become the general term, and video gamers and those gamers, that gaming group, will not be segregated and separated in most conversations. It probably would be better if that happened as soon as possible, because it also makes the negative allegations that are often thrown at video gamers feel less effective. Certainly even now when there are school shootings, there's always at least a few people that try to make knee-jerk reactions that, oh, this kid happened to play Doom once and thus that's the reason they turned out so mentally broken. Although those arguments are falling flatter and flatter with every day. If all of a sudden you really get into the mind of everybody that everybody's a gamer, there's very few people out there that aren't playing some kind of game, whether it's a video game or otherwise. That overall, I think, creates more common ground. I would also assume that these kinds of games are very easy to translate to English. Acquire's 30th anniversary website has been opened. So you have a collection here of characters, none of which I recognize. being shown. This is coming from Kadokawa Corporation, and it's I guess also worth pointing out that Kadokawa is being considered for a takeover and acquisition by Sony. Acquire made Akiba's Trip, which is often intentionally mispronounced as Akiba Strip because you're stripping energy vampires of their clothing down to their underwear. Octopath Traveler, Tenchu, Way of the Samurai, and more. And I can definitely say if Sony acquires Kadokawa and acquires Acquire as a subsidiary of Kadokawa, which I think it is, then you are going to run into this situation immediately where you never see another Akiba's Trip game made. Although odds are kind of low that you'll even see a new one now. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if you see very few games like any of these. Octopath Traveler sold well, so you may see more of those, but anything that's a little too Japanese may start to get just turned into something with a broader appeal instead, or replaced with something with a broader appeal. Let's see. Dragon Quest III HD 2D remake shipments and digital sales have topped 2 million. So it is certainly easier for a producer to say give your copy to kids and teach them how to play when your numbers are over 2 million in units sold. Certainly a small independent game developer can't make that same statement without hurting their bottom line. Tales of Iron 2 Whiskers of Winter launches January 28th, 2025. Which, yeah, I've already made a YouTube short around that. Street Fighter 6 DLC character Mai has a teaser trailer, which Mai, as a character I believe, has been in previous Street Fighter games. Unless I'm really confused here, and I can't help but wonder if there isn't a situation here where characters that were in previous Street Fighter games that should have been there as part of the base game during launch have been hidden behind season passes and DLC. It is unfortunate for female fighters, of which I don't think there are too many that fight in things like Street Fighting depicts it, that they really can't get away from their own physical forms as much, so that they are inherently heavily in danger of being groped or of having a boob flop out. Of course, the game here is expanding on that very much in that there is a ton of side boob being shown here, and highlighting that certainly intentionally to catch people's attention. In a real fight, though, I imagine you either stop caring about that, and at some point society probably would stop caring about it and everybody would just be fighting shirtless or topless. I wouldn't be surprised if there is certainly a level of that too that prevents females from ever even considering being in any form of martial art demonstrations or fights. Although we've mostly gotten that as far as the female UFCs, in that they're in these tight sports bras, so it's just more traditional garb, like Mai is wearing, this traditional Chinese garb, designed certainly to highlight her cleavage. Moving on, spine spray paint and camera work trailer screenshots. Looks a look at dynamic camera work and spray paint mechanics. Spine was a game that was announced a while ago, and then I've completely forgotten about it. Apparently you can straight up use spray paint to effectively mace enemies. In a lot of ways, this game feels somewhat reminiscent of a game called Remember Me, where the problem with Remember Me was that you had to do specific combos to do any damage at all. I would certainly hope that's not the case in Spine's case. It doesn't seem like it really is going to be the case. Spine is a great example, I think, of something that got announced too early and just doesn't have that Japanese style of making new announcements and trying to consistently make a new announcement every couple weeks to keep people thinking about the game, if not a new announcement every week. And yeah, certainly if I was going to publish a game, I would be making an initial announcement, and then once I actually started getting into the big push of the launch experience, I would be making an announcement every week. But even that initial announcement being 6 months to years before you really start to promote a game seems kind of unnecessary. A Celtic-inspired CRPG, Legends of Arwen, Rise of Vienna, has been announced for PC. Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 story trailer is available on Gematsu. Wanderstop launches March 11th, 2025. Well, that looks slightly different. A narrative-centric cozy game about change and tea. All of a sudden I want to kind of rush towards the end here, but still got a lot of news. City Builder City Tales Medieval Era has been announced for PC. I really don't even know why. I think I heard a package being delivered, and for some reason that's made me feel a little bit more antsy. Also, I feel like for a brief moment there, months and months ago, I'd really gotten it down to the level of urgency that I should have in each of these streams, and more recently I've been way too laid back and taking it way too slow. But yeah, there was also certainly a point there where it started to feel kind of pointless, where I was just reading the headlines and then moving on without saying any comment at all, or not really thinking about it. And that feels very pointless to me if I'm not even ingesting the knowledge during the whole process. We already talked about The Thing Remastered. The Alters demo is now available. The premise of this game sounds interesting. The actual gameplay experience, though, I wonder. So the demo may shine some more light on that. Although it is worth pointing out that I never see anybody comment or review on demos. So demos very much seem like they're either hyping up a very small number of gamers or anti-hyping a small number of gamers who play the demo and find they don't really like it. But I imagine the number of people that actually install demos before a game actually launches is very low, And I wouldn't. It would be helpful, certainly, for Valve and Steam to highlight how many times demos have been installed and played, just to give those kinds of metrics. They probably do give those metrics to the publishers and developers of games, but it would be helpful to get some of that information public too. The 2 hours no question asked refund policy on Steam effectively undoes the need for demos. So I would say, if it were a case that everybody was buying games on Steam and nowhere else, you'd see almost no game demos being made in the first place. But I imagine other shops, Xbox, PlayStation Network, Nintendo Switch Online, and the Epic Games Store and other stores, I imagine a lot of them still have a desire for you to have a demo for your game. Eternal Strands launches January 28th. Post-launch content collaboration with Square Enix Creative Studio 3 has been announced. I have no idea what Square Enix Creative Studio 3 is, however. I don't even know what Eternal Strands is. Well, this really looks very similar to several other games that I've seen recently. A turn-based strategy game, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tactical Takedown, has been announced for PC, which, that just seems like the completely wrong genre for Ninja Turtles. Not a single Ninja Turtle games previously has been a turn-based positional strategy game, and frankly I don't think the audience that like Ninja Turtles are going to like turn-based positional placement strategy games either. So yeah, I definitely have been hearing my house creak more lately. I think the coldness has finally settled in, and the heater, I've been adjusting my heater to heat less also, while still trying to maintain some level of comfort. I recently had gotten more Ecobee remote sensors from my thermostat to sense the temperature in every single room, and right now at the moment with my setup, it's not actually helping much because it's giving me more data that I'm not really going to use or act on. In the future that could certainly change, but right now it isn't the case, and who knows what the case will really be once summer happens. For the most part, my experience as far as winters go is you just need the heater to run fairly constantly, no matter what the temperature is. It's where winter happens that cooling can be reduced. Let's see, Komatsu has the Famitsu sales from the 25th to the 1st updated. So we've got Dragon Quest III in the 4th spot, with Nintendo Switch taking up all of the other spots down to the 29th spot, with Call of Duty in the 30th spot. None of these games are new except for Bang Bang Bandits in the 21st spot and Exit 8 on the 14th spot. So once again we see a week here where the Nintendo Switch is just so heavily dominating the top 30 sales. Of course, no Xbox games ever making it to the top 30 sales in Japan. Hardware sales are almost certainly going to reflect that, but it is interesting to point out that the PS5 is in the 2nd spot this week with 25,000 units. Still, the OLED model for the Switch is beating that by double, and that's not to even start to add Switch Lite to that number. PS5 Pro selling only 6,000 units, which only slightly beats the original Switch. Xbox Series X and Series S numbers are showing extremely high numbers this week also. And PS4 sales are practically non-existent. Demon Slayer Kimetsu no Yabai, the Hinokami Chronicles 2 have been announced. Which I would have to assume this is just a sequel to the first game. It's going to cover everything from the Entertainment District arc to the Hashira training arc. So this anime series, I assume, is doing fairly well still too. The MMO Interplanetary Crafting Adventure Spacecraft from Shiro Games has been announced. This is from Gaming on Linux, which we're going through their headlines now. The Thing Remastered, talked about. Is this on the follow list? Is it more effective to reload a page than it is to just click the follow list button? So far, very positive. FlatHub is going to become a self-sustaining entity, and they're looking to hire someone to help. FlatHub is one of a couple of websites used, or servers to use, to find flat packs. You can certainly have your own servers if you wanted. FlatHub is built into the Discovery app, which is on the desktop version, in the desktop mode of the Steam Deck. I guess it was being run by the GNOME Foundation, and they are effectively trying to separate it from GNOME, which probably makes some sense considering how a decent number of people who are using Flatpaks and FlatHub are using different desktops and over GNOME, like KDE. And it is generally the case that these kinds of Linux, somewhat open source projects are better off when they are more independent and separated and focused on a single thing, instead of trying to have major organizations do everything. Like Red Hat is probably an example of where it becomes weird and goes in a very different direction when you have a whole suite of software built into your own custom operating system. Ubuntu does some of that too, certainly has done more of that lately, where they're having specific Ubuntu applications in Ubuntu Linux. Let's see. The Marvel Rivals is out and works on the Steam Deck, but the Steam Deck has issues though. You apparently have to force Proton Experimental for it to work. Valve may be working on a new kind of Steam machine. I think that's fairly believable. It'll be interesting to see what that could be, though. Although it does kind of make some sense too. If Valve can't really significantly improve performance on a Steam Deck, because the Steam Deck's battery issues would become a problem then, and the heating and cooling, the cooling of the CPU would be a problem then. If the Steam Deck is just limited by its form factor, well, taking a year off, taking 2 years off even, and alternating might make some sense. So we might have this whole A-B structure in that a year or two from now, a Steam machine, which is a desktop machine custom designs so that you just buy it as a whole and it is just, this is your gaming PC. If that came out in a year or two, then they could say, well, now that we've released that, enough time has passed where we could come out with a Steam Deck too. And inherently that would get Valve twice as much money, in that you would every 4 years or so end up replacing your Steam machine or your Steam Deck. And that's not too crazy, really, either. To replace a new PC every 4 years makes decent sense. Of course, who knows where prices will go in the future, but there is it's more reasonable to replace a different type of device. Plus, you have interconnectivity of a Steam Deck and a Steam machine that almost certainly would be there, where a much more powerful Steam machine would be able to stream games to the Steam Deck inside your own house. Of course, a lot of this may very well just be too much speculation based on just a Steam controller too, which they may very well just come out with Steam controllers, then move on to try to work on something else, like even VR. And they may just move way slower. Valve time is still a concept to be concerned about. It is also very possible that Valve's number of employees is just so small that if they do shift all their focus away from the Steam Deck to make a Steam machine, then you'll stop seeing the Steam Deck getting improved upon, and it still has room for improvement. Or SteamOS stops getting improved upon as much. Or if they focused all on VR, then maybe Steam machines and SteamOS and the Steam Decks all stop getting focused on as much. I'd really like to hear Valve hiring a lot more people. That would benefit them. They'd probably acquire a new company before they hired, and that probably wouldn't help as much. War Thunder is moving away from Easy Anti-Cheat to BattleEye. I think Easy Anti-Cheat in particular is one of the ones that's less likely to work on Linux, but I don't recall anything about BattleEye, whether it works on Linux. NVIDIA's 565.77 stable driver has been released. Prime Gaming December 5th edition for Steam Deck and Linux is listed here as far as games on Amazon Prime. That Disney Dream Valley game, or Moonlight Valley, the Animal Crossing clone, is doing the whole event for Christmas, and that's noticeable in that A, it's not going to get any news press apparently, and B, there's probably a lot of games like that are doing Christmas-like festivals, and that they just don't push it, they don't promote it publicly, or they don't get any press if they do push it and promote it. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if Genshin Impact and things like that have some kind of Christmas hat or something being given away. A Steam Bullet Heaven Festival 2.0 is alive to show off explosive growth of the genre, and they're showing off several games. That being said, in Bullet Heaven, you are mostly spamming out the attacks against hordes of enemies rather than dodging all their attacks like you would in a Bullet Hell. Oh, so that's the difference. That you just aren't that you just aren't really having to worry about dodging as much. I'm trying to find the link here somewhere on the page, but if there's a link to this event, I can't find it. All I see here is a link that I think if I click on it, it's just going to take me back to this same page, which doesn't even make sense for the title to have that link. Okay, here we go. Found it finally. So once again is a third party event that is not even getting promoted on the front page. And yeah, Valve certainly seems to be allowing a lot of these kinds of events to happen and then kind of not doing anything about it. And so I kind of question the point. At a certain point, it's just like Valve is allowing some page deep hidden where you would never even see it to be rented out. And then you're, I assume, just forcing the event presenters to do their own thing. You can see like Human Cube Games here has only 95 followers. Yeah, I don't recognize any of these event hosts at all. None of these names. May also be a case that there's just a cost of being placed on the front page, or that certain events like this are really being targeted to other regions. Moving on, Delta Force developer mentions they will look into supporting the Steam Deck and Linux. That's not really promising anything, though. The Mesa 24.3.1 open source graphic drivers have been released. We're getting a lot of these updates, certainly, as far as driver updates, which I imagine are going to happen. Some of these stories are also older. Long Dark gets an update. GameDeveloper.com stories still not opening, so we don't have any open at the moment at all to talk about. So that's going to quickly bring us to all the new games on Steam, which, yes, let's burn through all the new games on Steam. I can already tell today that I'm going to be exhausted, and so it has always been the case when I stream on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, as far as just how can I regain any energy. And yeah, I have never found a good answer to that. Left to my own devices, I probably would stream at the end of the night, although that would be very inconsistent. That way, if I was exhausted from just all the talking and all of the sitting for 2 to 3 hours, I could then immediately just fall asleep. And that's not a bad strategy in general. Do the most exhausting thing last if you have any capability of scheduling yourself like that. Of course, there is a danger if you're doing something physical or dangerous. If you do that in the evening where you're already maybe a little tired, you're going to put yourself at risk. Of hurting yourself or something like that. But live streaming is dangerous. Worst case scenario is I would fall asleep while streaming. There's another adult game that should have been curated and This curation still not working perfectly. Still not sure why. Yep, there's another one. Both of those games should not be viewable at all, in that I've already disabled showing the adult store content, so seeing those two games shows that adult store content is still being allowed outside of the adult store. And on one hand, I definitely think that there probably should be a crackdown by Valve on cheaters, people not properly labeling their games. And maybe that does eventually happen. But on the other hand, I also don't want to see Valve spend any energy in censoring and cracking down on games when there's just more important stuff they could be doing. And in fairness, it's not a big enough issue that anybody's really writing articles about it. And that maybe 2 or 3 out of hundreds of games released every couple of days on Steam are outside of the adult section where they should be. This looks like this might be an older game, even though I don't recognize it. Yeah, here's another one that seems like it might be a little bit looter, although it probably isn't. It's probably one of these Chinese ones that would maybe show somebody's feet, and that's about it. Now, over the years, I've just come to learn that there's never going to be a good Christmas or Santa Claus game. And honestly, I don't know what you really could do about it. If I was going to make a Santa Claus game, I would probably make some kind of management experience where it's just like Paperboy or some game like that, where you're just delivering presents. This looks like not a terrible math game. But yep. I don't know what else you could really do, because everything else would just be some dumb parody of Santa Claus. Got duplicate tabs open. Still don't really feel like Firefox as a browser is as good as it should be. Of course, there's really no choice either. Can't go to Chrome. I guess if Google really was forced to sell off Chrome and lose any influence or interest in it, that you might see a new group of people running Chrome a lot better and bringing back the ability to have uBlock Origin actually work at a decent level with Manifest version 2, Manifest version 1 instead of Manifest version 3, which was pretty obviously designed to prevent ad blocking. Well, this is a shocking game to come out of nowhere. Stranger Things VR. I would assume that maybe via phone there was a way to do Stranger Things VR already, and it's just now coming to PC. Otherwise, this is a project that they're just shoving out the door. I do think maybe there is one more season of Stranger Things, either that has recently come out or that is going to come out, but then I would assume Stranger Things is going to be done. And yeah, it may take a while after that for people to decide whether they think Stranger Things is a classic or not. And in the case of Netflix series like Stranger Things, it's not like it's going to go to syndication or other TV services or streaming services. So it may just not have that repeatability. Same is kind of true with like Game of Thrones. Like Game of Thrones, even if it hadn't had a terrible season at the end, still wouldn't have really had that replayability outside of HBO properties and streaming services for new people to see it. Yeah, that's always been my thought as far as Babylon 5. Babylon 5 was on TBS, a brand new channel at the time, basically, and very few people saw it. And then Deep Space Nine came out and basically ripped it off, which stole a bunch of its audience too. So yeah, and then Babylon 5 is just not getting repeated on any channels as far as I know at all. So yeah, it never became this cult hit that people, well, it is a cult following, but it's not as big of a cult hit as it probably should have been. Yeah, Babylon 5's Blu-ray is supposedly half on sale on Amazon right now, and I guess if you didn't own it, I could suggest picking it up, but since I already have it on DVD, I definitely just can't justify my mind buying it a second time. While I'm cleaning house right now, I am in this weird situation that you very rarely have, in that I am getting entire shelves and things cleared, and there will just be fairly empty shelves once everything is said and done, which is not a bad thing. Like, shelves are generally designed to highlight things, so you tend not to need to have them just crammed with stuff. Now, books and DVDs are pretty much designed to be on store shelves, so they are designed to be more crammed. But actual curios and things like that, I'm gonna go ahead and take this off the follow list. Things that you actually would want to display, photos, things like that. Those definitely do better when they are spread apart more, and each individual thing is highlighted as its own individual thing versus is a pile of photos or picture frames. And yeah, but that there is certainly a danger in having emptier shelves, in that there is always room to grow and start collecting a lot more. But I'm not leaning towards thinking I'm going to do that. I do have many years more now under my belt as far as having collected things and owning things and not really using them, not really watching the movies that are on my shelves, not really reading the books, or even looking and appreciating at the curios. So I would kind of just question whether I'd fall into that or not as much as I once did in my past. Things have certainly changed a lot too. Back when I was buying DVDs and Blu-rays, streaming didn't even exist. Right. So I want to ask this one question. Bobber Bros the hole. Then you have an eye looking up the legs. Is this too lewd of a game title? This feels like this is too lewd of a title. Opie and Anthony, Radio Shock Jocks, had the phrase the hole that they would use as far as the insulting term to talk about female radio disc jockeys that were added to talk shows to stop the boys club mentality and the boys talk and the locker room talk, or just stop the phone. And so the idea is that she would be the hole of fun, the black hole of fun, but also there is a anatomical insult being thrown there. And they weren't 100% only using it against female people, but there was usually always one corporately assigned persons to a lot of the disc jockey groups that were talking that they would highlight. And of course, Opie and Anthony, kind of notorious for being a little sexist and a little racy in their talk. Whether they believed it or not, I will not speculate. And so I wonder if there's an influence there in that title. Very possibly there is. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.